Hello everyone, welcome back to Eerie Hour. Today I've got something truly chilling for you. Long, detailed cruise ship stories that might make you think twice before planning your next ocean getaway. In this episode, we'll dive into the dark and dangerous depths of the open sea with 8 horrifying tales of terror aboard luxury cruise liners, inspired by true events from passengers who faced nightmares they could never forget. Each story has been carefully researched, based on the disturbing experiences of real people who learned that paradise at sea can quickly become a drifting prison of fear. From mysterious vanishings in the dead of night to twisted predators hiding in the glowing hallways of giant ships, these stories reveal the grim truth behind the glossy promises of the cruise industry. To protect those involved, some names and small details have been changed, but the horrors remain as real as ever. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to Eerie Hour for daily true horror stories that'll make you second-guess every vacation plan. Hit that bell so you never miss when the darkness comes calling. Because out here on these waters, things run far deeper and far darker than they appear. The cruise ship left the harbor beneath the bright summer sun, its decks alive with laughter and excitement as passengers began their journey across the open sea. Among the thousands of guests was a young couple, Anna and Jeff, who had been waiting for this trip for years. It was meant to be their dream vacation, a break from long work days, filled with romantic dinners under the stars and lazy mornings by the pool. But from the moment they stepped aboard the majestic Voyager, something felt off. The ship was enormous, its white and navy blue hull glistening in the light, and its halls covered in marble floors, sparkling chandeliers, and tall windows that showed endless waves. Yet beneath all that beauty, the air felt strange, thick, heavy, as if the ship carried a secret that no one else could sense. Passengers walked around happily, unaware of the cold, uneasy presence that lingered through the corridors. That evening, as Anna and Jeff strolled along the deck, something strange happened. The ocean was calm, stars glowing above, when they spotted a woman standing alone near the railing. She wore a torn white gown, the fabric fluttering in the wind, her long black hair falling over her pale, expressionless face. She stared out into the dark waves as if searching for something lost. Curious, Anna moved closer, about to speak, but the woman suddenly turned. Her eyes were hollow, lifeless, and her mouth opened silently as if she was trying to speak but couldn't. Before Anna could react, the woman faded into the darkness, melting into the sea air as if she had never been there. Shaken, Anna and Jeff tried to laugh it off, blaming it on nerves and imagination. But deep inside, unease started to grow. That night, as they tried to sleep, a strange knocking began. Tap, tap, tap. It came from the walls, then under the floorboards. At first, they thought it was just the ship creaking, but the sound became sharper, faster, almost like someone trying to get their attention. Jeff got up, checked the hallway, the bathroom, even the balcony, but nothing was there. The knocking stopped the moment he returned, leaving behind a silence that felt too still, too deliberate. Over the next few days, more strange things followed. The other passengers seemed happy, distracted by the fun of the cruise. But for Anna and Jeff, every night brought new noises, louder knocking, strange whispers, cold air that brushed against their skin. Sometimes Anna woke in the dark and swore she could feel someone standing in the corner, just watching. When she looked, there was no one, only shadows that didn't seem to belong. A few nights later, the ship passed through a storm. It wasn't too strong, but the waves rocked the vessel and thunder rolled over the ocean. The lights in their cabin flickered, creating quick flashes of shadow on the walls. The knocking came again, louder than ever. Then came whispering, soft, eerie words in a language they couldn't understand. Terrified, they ran to the reception desk, hoping someone could explain. The woman behind the counter, older with cold eyes, only gave a strange smile and said, "It's the ship's old story. Dear happens to new guests sometimes. Don't worry, it'll pass." Before they could ask anything else, her face went blank, and she waved them away. That night, as the storm raged, the sounds grew unbearable. The knocking pounded like fists, and the whispers turned to cries. Anna sat in bed, trembling, when something moved across the room, a dark figure. It was her, the woman in the white gown. Only now her dress was dripping with seawater, and her skin had turned grayish and cold-looking, like she had drowned long ago. She stood by the corner, pointing toward the window, her mouth open in silence, her eyes filled with horror. Anna couldn't move. The air in the cabin grew icy, her breath coming out in fog. Then the woman's body began to twist, her face stretching into a scream so silent it made the room shake. Shadows crawled up the walls and the sound of rushing waves filled their ears. Then, nothing. The woman vanished, and all was quiet again. The next morning, pale and shaking, Anna and Jeff went to find the captain. He listened quietly, his weathered face serious. Finally, he told them the truth. Her name was Sarah. She had been one of the ship's first passengers many years ago, and one night she vanished. No one ever found her body. The captain said some believed she fell overboard, but others thought something far worse had taken her. The ship had a history, he admitted, stories of passengers who disappeared without reason, crew members who swore they saw shapes in the fog or felt unseen hands brushing past them. Some said the ship was haunted by those lost to the sea. Others believed something darker lived beneath the waves, feeding on fear. After that talk, Anna and Jeff tried to ignore the strange events, but the knocking continued every night, sometimes joined by faint sobbing or whispers outside their door. And every night, the pale woman reappeared for just a moment, always silent, always pointing toward the ocean. When the cruise finally ended, the ship docked without trouble, and they disembarked. But neither of them felt relief. Even back home, the sound followed them, soft knocking against their walls late at night, a chill in the air when no windows were open. Sometimes Anna would wake to faint whispers calling her name, and when she closed her eyes, she could still see that woman standing on the deck, her gaze fixed on the endless sea, waiting for someone to finally listen. Next story. It was a quiet night. The sea spread endlessly around the luxury cruise ship, the Neptune's glory. Everything seemed perfect. The guests sipped cocktails by the pool, music played softly, and laughter floated in the breeze. Yet beneath the joy, there was something wrong. A cold uneasiness hung in the air, something that couldn't be explained. The ship had left Miami days ago, and at first all seemed fine. Then strange things started happening. People began hearing faint whispers in the hallways, soft enough to doubt they were real crew members. Usually cheerful, started avoiding eye contact, speaking in hushed tones. Some entertainment shows were suddenly canceled, and the captain stopped appearing in public altogether. On the fourth night, a few passengers gathered in the lounge after dinner. They had heard rumors of weird events on past trips, but thought they were just stories. One man, Daniel, spoke up. He said he had found a door left open on the upper deck, one that led to the ship's lower maintenance areas, where guests weren't allowed. Out of curiosity, he went inside. The hallway was dim and quiet. Then he heard something, crying, a woman's voice, soft and distant. When he checked the rooms, they were empty. No sound, no people, just darkness. The group went silent, unsure if they should laugh or be afraid. When the waiter serving them suddenly dropped his tray, his hands shaking, the laughter stopped completely. Later that night, fog surrounded the ship so thick it swallowed the stars. The loudspeakers crackled, but the voice that came through didn't sound normal. It was the captain, distorted, echoing, like he was speaking underwater. "I think we're lost," whispered a woman named Margaret. "We're in the Bermuda Triangle." The others tried to joke, but their smiles faded fast. The ship began to slow down, as though the sea itself was pulling against it. By morning, several passengers had vanished. A dozen gone without a trace. Rumors spread fast. Some said they saw ghostly shapes in the fog. Others said they heard footsteps behind them, only to find no one there. On the third night, 3 friends, Chris, Emily, and Hannah, decided to uncover the truth. They had heard the whispers near that same forbidden corridor Daniel mentioned, and they wanted answers. It was after midnight when they found the door. The hallway beyond was dark. the air cold and stale. Their lights flickered as they walked deeper. Then came the whispers again, soft at first, then louder, like many voices speaking at once. Suddenly, a figure appeared. It looked like a man at first, but as it stepped closer, they saw it wasn't alive. Its skin was gray, its eyes hollow. It lifted a shaking hand and pointed straight at them. They ran, but when they turned back, the door was gone, sealed by darkness. Their lights died. In panic, they stumbled into another room, cold and silent. Inside, they saw them. Bodies of old passengers, their eyes open but lifeless, faces frozen in silent terror. And at the center stood the captain, pale and still, his mouth open in a soundless scream. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Eerie Hour. Before we start today's terrifying stories, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Let's move to our first story, and this one begins with a widow who thought her biggest fear was traveling alone until she realized someone else was writing her itinerary. Helen Morrison had always imagined that her golden years would be filled with late mornings, blooming gardens, and beachside strolls with her husband Samuel. But now, 8 months after his passing, the large Victorian house in San Diego felt colder, emptier, and too large for her to breathe comfortably in. Each room held a long shadow, stretching even farther than the night before. At 62, Helen was learning that being alone wasn't the soft retreat she once loved. It was a heavy fog that wrapped around her shoulders and stayed even when bright California sunlight pushed through her kitchen window. Her friends worried. They called often, brought her baked treats, tried to make her laugh, and gently encouraged her to take a little break. Just one small trip, Helen, Europe. You always loved the sea, said Julia. Helen's daughter, always the practical one, booked her a ticket without asking twice. Suddenly, Helen found herself at Cividkia's loud, chaotic port, passport shaking in her hand, suitcase clattering over uneven pavement. The serenity of the seas towered in front of her, its white decks shining with a strange and almost too perfect promise. A cruise, the sort of trip Samuel had talked about for years, but never took. As she boarded, her heart fluttered with a mix of fragile excitement and sharp guilt. The Mediterranean in late spring welcomed her, with warm scents of lavender and citrus drifting through the halls as she walked the bright corridors and sweeping staircases. Her thoughts twisted between hope and longing, between fear and the aching wish to feel alive again. The giant dining hall with its glowing chandeliers and soft chatter felt overwhelming. Sitting alone, she felt like she was on an island. She planned to stay quiet, spend her days reading on the balcony, take early breakfast, and avoid the cheerful cruise staff. That first night, as the ship moved toward Marseille, Helen stood at the upper deck, wrapped in an old silk scarf, staring at the dark, glittering waves. A soft cough behind her made her turn. A distinguished older man stood there, maybe 10 years older, with silver hair and the posture of someone raised in old European manners. "May I?" he asked, motioning to the railing. His voice had a light London tone. She nodded without thinking. "My friends call me Arthur. Traveling alone," he said. His eyes were gray like storm clouds, his suit crisp and perfect. They chatted politely, Helen careful, Arthur effortlessly reassuring, his stories rolling out like well-kept secrets. Even though she hid her sadness, Arthur seemed to sense it. He stayed gentle, never pushy. Their talk was short, but as the days blended together, they kept running into each other on the deck, in the library, in the quiet corner of the breakfast room, sometimes almost too conveniently. Little by little, Helen felt her chest loosen and laughter return to her voice. But strange things began to stir uneasy feelings in her stomach. Arthur always knew where she was. On the third day he appeared at her yoga class, though he'd said he'd never tried yoga. He offered to help with her suitcase lock, yet when she checked, the suitcase was untouched and perfectly arranged. Notes appeared at her door, written in neat blue ink, inviting her for champagne or silly little games when she least expected it. She tried to believe these were coincidences, the kind that happen on ships. But on the fifth evening, As the ship left Barcelona, she found a gold cufflink tucked between the pages of her favorite novel, almost identical to the one Arthur had worn earlier that week. That night, thunder cracked outside her balcony, and a cold shiver clung to her. Were these gestures kind or quietly threatening? Her husband's old words echoed, "Trust your instincts when they whisper." She began watching Arthur closely. He was always alone, always just near enough. Yet she never saw him with friends. He never used a phone. He addressed the staff like he knew them. But when she asked a waitress, the girl admitted she had never seen him before. Nervous but trying to stay calm, Helen went to the front desk to check Arthur Wellington, traveling solo, Suite 312, the clerk said after a pause. But the hesitation in his voice made her wonder if it was true at all. That night she drifted in and out of uneasy sleep, dreams of faceless dancers wearing gold cufflinks chasing her through empty hallways. In the morning, Arthur was his usual pleasant self, but Helen carefully questioned him about his past. His answers were smooth but blurry, just vague enough to feel wrong. "I'm sorry, Helen. I do go on. Tell me about your daughter," he said, twisting the attention off himself. Helen's smile tightened as she shared only vague details. Later in the library, she heard whispering near a staff door. A young housekeeper noticed her and hurried over. "That man with you?" "Be careful," she murmured, eyes wide and frightened. "We've seen him before, always with older women traveling alone. He never stays long." Before Helen could ask more, the girl backed away nervously. Fear washed over Helen. She began digging for clues, old cruise newsletters, online mentions, gossip floating through the salon. A name showed up, Arthur Wells, a suspected scammer who preyed on widows on European cruises, victims left with lost money, missing jewelry, sometimes worse injuries. Nothing had ever been proven. Helen's breathing quickened. She searched her luggage, her safe, everything, and realized Arthur somehow knew her cabin number from the start. She tried to remember when she told him, but she never had. Her habits changed instantly. She avoided empty halls, stayed in crowds, kept her guard up. The warm Mediterranean air turned icy. On the 6th night, she confronted him on the promenade while a quartet played quietly. "Arthur, I've enjoyed our talks, but something feels strange. How do you always find me? And why were your cufflinks in my book?" For the first time, Arthur looked shaken. He laughed too loudly, his smooth tone cracking. "You left it on the pool deck. I was returning it. Truly." But his hand shook. Helen turned sharply, heart pounding, and rushed to guest services, asking security to escort her to her cabin. That night, she locked herself inside. Her phone buzzed with a message. "Let's talk. Just the two of us. No trouble." The number was unknown, but she knew it was him. She blocked it, double-checking the deadbolt with trembling hands. A soft knock on her door made her nearly jump, but reception insisted no staff or guests had been near her floor. Morning came, and Arthur was simply gone. His room empty, his belongings vanished as if he had never existed. No one would explain whether he left the ship or slipped somewhere else. Helen spent the rest of the trip in tense silence. But slowly, as they approached Naples, her fear faded into shaky relief. She had trusted her instincts. She was safe. On the final day, the young housekeeper found her again and handed her a folded note with quick fingers. "From a friend," she whispered. Helen opened it, her hands unsteady. "You were braver than most. He won't bother you again." No name, only a single pressed violet. Samuel's favorite flower, standing on the deck as Italy's coast glowed in the distance. Helen felt three things blend inside her: grief for the love she'd lost, pride for her strength, and a new spark of hope for her future. Around her, laughter rose into the warm air, and the sun broke across the wide blue sea. This time, Helen let herself enjoy the moment, not as someone lonely, but as someone finally free. She would book another cruise soon, she decided, only this time with a new rule. Her story would be her own, and no one would write the ending but her. Now we turn to our second story, Story 2. And it starts with a grandmother who planned the perfect family reunion cruise, only to discover that some family secrets should have stayed buried at sea. Aaliyah had always seen herself as the glue holding her family's generations together. After years of care, advice, and keeping her doors open, she wanted to give them something truly special, a Caribbean cruise for everyone, not just her children, but a long chain of siblings, in-laws, cousins, and grandchildren. At 48, Aaliyah felt both proud and nervous as she stood on the shining deck with her 22 relatives, 3 generations stretching from her cheerful toddler granddaughter Camille to her quiet, stern Uncle Hector, all preparing for a week in ocean paradise. In the first few relaxed days, it felt like her dream was finally real. Children splashed in the pool while their parents lounged nearby. Old arguments faded into the background as the ship's endless buffets seemed to make everyone friendlier than usual. During dinners under the warm breeze, stories flowed easily. Laughter mixed with the soft hum of the sea, and Aaliyah kept a protective eye on her grandson, her daughter Kiara's teenage boy. At 16, he was gentle and thoughtful, always helping little Camille and chatting about big ideas with Uncle Hector. On the 4th night, as the sunset lit the sky with glowing colors, Aaliyah's family gathered for a special reunion meal. Glasses clinked and promises were made to make new memories together. Kiara's son sat beside Aaliyah, excitedly talking about exploring the lower decks that evening with his best friend Titus. But as dessert arrived, the joyful noise faded. The boy was gone. At first, everyone assumed he'd gotten distracted, maybe chasing Camille or joining teens in the game room. But as minutes stretched into hours and security searched every level without success, worry shifted into real fear. Aaliyah's heart pounded painfully, heavy with guilt. She walked the ship's long halls again and again, searching every quiet corner, stores, and dim lounges. The crew worked quickly, their radios full of sharp whispers. The captain, steady but tense, promised no place would be missed. Still, Kiara's son was nowhere fear-shattered the fragile peace of Aaliyah's family. Blame simmered in every conversation. Who was supposed to watch him? Who last saw him? And what had he really planned that night? As they searched, old family wounds began to rise. Her sister Katala snapped at her about a forgotten argument. Her brother Eliam accused a cousin of holding old grudges, and Aaliyah felt her own anger flare after a tense exchange with Edwin about responsibility. But as the night thickened, strange things troubled not just the family but the ship. A hollow echo drifted through the empty lounge near midnight, and Aaliyah, already shaking inside, felt cold air curl around her. Even though the Caribbean evening was warm, her Uncle Hector, normally logical and calm, admitted he had seen a dark shape move through the reflection of his cabin mirror right before the lights flickered. Titus, the missing boy's best friend, said he heard someone crying in the hallway, but when he checked, the hall was empty except for the dull vibration of the engines below. Determined to stay strong, Aaliyah relied on her counselor instincts. She gathered family members in a suite, keeping her voice calm and steady. She asked everyone to share their last moments with Kiara's son, hoping to find a clue. Was he upset? Did he argue with anyone? Had someone hurt his feelings? They tried to piece it all together, but everything felt wrong, like the missing truth was hiding in the dark corners of the ship. Aaliyah walked the deck in the rain, speaking to every crew member who might have seen him. The only hint came from a cook who remembered hearing the teenager quietly humming an old sea shanty in the kitchen at dusk. An odd, haunting tune in such a cheerful place. The next morning, fog clung thickly to the windows as Aaliyah headed to the ship's small library for a moment of calm. With trembling hands, she searched the shelves and found a diary tucked behind a worn book about Atlantic voyages. The slanted handwriting felt familiar. It belonged to an ancestor, Sarah, who had lived almost 200 years earlier. As Aaliyah read under the dim library light, she learned about a curse tied to her family's past. Sarah had sailed the Caribbean on a slave ship that vanished in a storm, carrying sorrow, pain, and secrets the family never fully spoke of. Growing up, Aaliyah had heard whispers, bad luck, strange deaths, family fights, but she never believed them. Now with Kiara's son missing, and the ship feeling heavier with every passing hour, she couldn't ignore the dark stories anymore. That afternoon, as she gathered her shaken relatives, more unsettling incidents came to light. Edwin and his wife said they felt cold hands pressed down on their shoulders at night. Someone or something kept moving belongings to the wrong rooms. Little Camille woke crying, saying she saw a sad ghost staring at her in the mirror. The sense of being watched, of unseen eyes following every step in argument, grew stronger. Lennon, usually the skeptic, admitted she had seen a shadow slip under her bed, making her too frightened to sleep alone. Panic took hold as more secrets spilled out. Arguments about old money, betrayals, hidden resentments, even injuries no one had admitted causing. On the fifth night, Aaliyah brought everyone together in the lounge. Holding Sarah's diary tight, she spoke clearly. "I know you're hurting, I'm hurting too. I read our ancestors' story about the darkness families carry through generations. Maybe we all carry curses, not because of ghosts, but because we never face the truth about each other." Her words broke something open. Tears flowed. Voices shook as long, hidden confessions came out. Eliam admitted he stole money years ago. Katala revealed a quiet divorce. In years of jealousy, Edwin confessed to debts he hid that had affected them all. Lennon spoke of old pains she never shared, built up since childhood. Slowly, painfully, the family began to soften. Meanwhile, the crew searched every hidden area of the ship. Rumors spread among passengers. Some claimed the vessel was cursed. Others said it was unlucky to have so many relatives sailing together. Aaliyah, exhausted and shaking, stood alone on the deck at midnight, staring at the endless black water, wondering if Kiara's son was out there somewhere in the strange pull of the sea. Kiara barely spoke through the entire nightmare, her heartbreak growing with every passing hour she held on to Titus, who stayed by her side day and night, sharing every memory he had with her son, every laugh, every dream. His loyalty brought Aaliyah a small light of hope in the middle of the family's drowning fears. The next morning brought a fragile calm. It felt like a storm had passed through their hearts. Then, just after sunrise, a knock at Aaliyah's door changed everything. Kiara's son had been found near the engine rooms. Quiet but alive, confused and pale. He said he had followed a distant voice and then remembered nothing else, waking only to the deep rumbling of the engines. No one understood how he ended up there. All that mattered was that he was back. Kiara cried as she wrapped him in her arms, Titus standing beside them, relief filling his face. The boy seemed different, softer, wiser somehow, though he couldn't clearly recall the strange hours he was missing. As the cruise neared its end, Aaliyah watched her family slowly rebuild itself through small gestures. Whispers of apology, gentle hugs, shared moments of comfort. The reunion hadn't been the joyful week she had imagined, but it had brought understanding and truth. Hector, the family elder, offered forgiveness that lifted a heavy weight from everyone. Little Camille seemed lighter too, playing happily again as the ship returned toward home. Aaliyah spent her last evening alone, writing notes she hoped her grandchildren would someday read. The diary stayed safely in her luggage, a reminder that families carry darkness as well as the strength to rise above it. On the dock, as the family prepared to leave, Aaliyah hugged Kiara's son tightly. His voice was soft as he thanked her for never giving up on him, for choosing forgiveness instead of blame. Titus promised to stay close, and Aaliyah saw their friendship had grown stronger through what they endured. Aaliyah looked out at the bright water, feeling the old family shadows finally fall away. Katala walked by her side, the distance between them slowly mending. Eliam carried Camille on his shoulders. Free from the guilt he had hidden for decades, Edwin and Lennon spoke quietly about rebuilding the future, with honesty instead of resentment. And when next, her family suggested a reunion. She smiled and promised to host a garden party at home. Sometimes paradise is not the absence of pain, but the courage to face it together even when the open sea has other plans. Our third account takes us to a retirement Story 3 cruise that promised a journey around the world, but somehow trapped its passengers in a single endless day. Dexter and Mela, both in their late 60s, had finally set out on what they lovingly called their last big adventure. Dexter, a retired architect who loved shaping huge spaces, and Mela, a former music therapist who believed melodies could heal the heart, had bought tickets for the massive world cruise liner, the Celestial Voyager. Their dream was simple. They wanted to spend 120 days drifting across oceans, visiting every continent, and enjoying the wonders of the world at a peaceful pace. For the first week aboard Celestial Voyager, everything felt magical. From grand dinners glowing under crystal chandeliers to quiet mornings watching dolphins leap by the bow, every moment felt like a prize after decades of hard work. Dexter filled his journal with sketches of faraway docks, while Mela hummed tunes inspired by the moving waves and soft skies. They felt lighter, as if their old worries had finally disappeared like sea mist. But slowly, days began blending into each other in a way that made their skin crawl. Conversations repeated exactly word for word at breakfast, as if someone had pressed replay on life faces in the crowd repeated the same smiles, the same hand movements, and the captain's announcements seemed to echo a strange welcome message that never changed. Other passengers seemed trapped in these odd loops too. Some looked confused, others numb, but all of them moved like they were stuck inside a day that refused to end. Dexter and Mela's comfort turned to uneasy fear. Their carefully marked schedule stopped making sense. Maps of visited ports changed in tiny ways during the night, and dreams soon bled into daytime. Dreams filled with storms, drowning voices, and lands that were never found. More travelers shared stories of reliving old mistakes, regrets they thought they'd left behind, all of them drifting together in waters where time felt twisted. Troubled, Dexter buried himself in his sketchbooks, drawing hallways that didn't stay the same size or shape. Growing longer or bending into odd angles, overnight, Mela felt her own music shift. Melodies stretching too slow or snapping too fast, as if they were no longer part of normal time. They became desperate to understand, to escape the strange trap closing in on them during what was supposed to be their golden years. Wandering the repeating hallways, they met Samuel, a retired geologist whose trembling hands told his fear before he even spoke. He described his own nightmare, moments repeating without answers, a life paused in a strange loop. Beatrice, once a praised dancer, shared her disturbing story of performing the same ballroom routine every sunset. Unable to step off the dance floor, trapped with music that never ended. The couple's marriage, already strong from decades together, deepened further inside this unreal drift through repeating time. They revisited memories they'd buried for years. Unfinished apologies and forgotten dreams suddenly returned with haunting clarity, demanding to be faced before time itself erased them. Mela's music grew heavier and sadder, while Dexter's architectural drawings twisted into strange shapes. Beautiful but broken at the same time, days melted into weeks, or maybe it was the same day repeating endlessly. They no longer knew. The ship's clocks moved, but time itself felt frozen. Passengers aged not by passing days, but by the weight of replaying the same experiences. Some accepted it as a strange kind of peace. Others broke under the strain. Every person aboard had begun to change. Dexter tried to understand their situation with careful notes, measuring the ship's size each morning, only to discover impossible changes. Corridors shrinking, ceilings rising, cabins moving inches to the left or right. Mela created songs that felt like they lived outside reality, tunes that stayed in the air even after she stopped humming. They explored every corner of the ship, even hidden passages that seemed to appear and disappear, searching for a way out they could never reach. The supernatural part of their nightmare became impossible to ignore when shadows started drifting on their own, sliding away from the bodies that should have cast them. Reflections in mirrors began showing scenes from their past. Moments replayed endlessly, like memories refusing to rest. Mela watched her younger self guiding children through therapy sessions, singing the same songs on repeat. Dexter stared at reflections of himself designing buildings, only to see them crumble and rebuild over and over. Other passengers shared their own strange loops. Valencia, once a teacher, said she marked the same papers every morning, with mistakes returning even after she fixed them. Marcus, a chef, prepared meals that vanished only to be demanded again instantly, his work stuck in an endless cycle of serving and starting over. The emotional strain grew heavier as Dexter and Mela realized they weren't just stuck in time. They were facing the deepest fears of their lives. What meaning did life hold if everything repeated? What purpose did love have if nothing changed? These thoughts haunted their days and filled their nights with a quiet terror that felt worse than any ghost story. One cold, misty evening, maybe the 100th time, or maybe the 1000th, they ended up on the observation deck, staring at the same sheet of fog that never shifted. The stars overhead stayed locked in place, constellations memorized long ago, refusing to move forward. Here, in this frozen moment, they faced a choice that felt like it could break them. A voice, coming from the ship, or maybe their own minds, offered a decision. They could stay in this looping day forever, living in safety and sameness, their love preserved exactly as it was, or they could step into the real world again, aging, fading, risking pain and loss, but finally living a future with real change and real time. This choice tore at them. Staying meant comfort and the guarantee that nothing would ever harm their love. Leaving meant accepting the fragility of life, the certainty of aging, and the truth that someday they would lose one another, but it also meant time would move again. Memories would grow, moments would matter. Choosing bravery over fear and life over stillness, Dexter gently held Mella's aging hand, and together they chose to face whatever waited outside their strange prison. As they stepped forward, the air around them rippled like heat rising from a road, and the endless day finally cracked open into something new. The fog thinned, revealing a horizon they had not seen in what felt like forever, a horizon that promised real tomorrows. The ship, once their cage, now felt like a vessel moving toward hope, carrying them back into a world where time flowed again. And as the fog cleared for good, they found joy returning in small moments. Each sunrise looking different, each conversation holding something new, each precious second reminding them that life is beautiful because it ends in the days that followed their freedom from the loop. Dexter and Mella found meaning in every tiny detail. They felt alive in ways they hadn't for years. The world opened itself to them again, not as a repeating dream, but as a story still being written, full of love, fear, and hope. Through the strange voyage of the celestial voyager, they learned a truth deeper than any ocean and more lasting than any building Dexter ever designed, that the real journey is inside the heart. A journey measured not by places or days, but by the courage to step forward into the unknown, holding on to both joy and pain, even when the past whispers temptingly for them to stay frozen in a moment that felt forever young. Moving on to our Story for Four story, and this one opens with four lifelong book club friends who thought their toughest challenge would be finishing their latest novel, but instead found themselves fighting for survival against the Alaskan wilderness. Kayla, EA, Maya, and Tessa had been inseparable since their 20s, bonded not just by book club meetings, but by a friendship shaped through countless struggles and victories. Their shared love for adventure and stories had taken them across the world in imagination. But this Alaskan fishing charter was meant to be their boldest real-life experience. Yet a quiet journey through faraway waters and hidden coves, a chance to see wild beauty with their own eyes and make memories under the glowing northern lights. Before the trip, they spent months getting ready, sharing tips about winter gear, survival tricks from thrillers they had read, and recipes that would help them if things went wrong. Kayla, the calm leader who always guided their group through emotional storms, insisted on careful planning. EA, with her outdoor guiding experience, tested their equipment and practiced fire-starting drills. Maya brought medical supplies and all her knowledge from years of saving lives. And Tessa, always clever and quick, packed tools and gadgets that might keep them alive in a crisis. The charter started beautifully aboard the Northern Dream, a tough 40-foot fishing boat captained by Tom McKenzie, a rugged man who had survived these waters for 3 decades. They traveled along sharp, icy coastlines, sipping hot cocoa while whales rose from the ocean like giants and stared at ice gleaming like diamonds under the dim Arctic sun. Their evenings were filled with laughter, reading old adventure books together, and late-night walks under the glowing auroras that painted the sky. But on the 4th night, a furious storm slammed the region like something alive. Winds screamed like angry spirits. The boat rocked violently, and towering waves pounded the hull. Captain Mackenzie fought to steer the vessel, but a monstrous wave smashed into the wheelhouse and hurled him into the navigation console. Blood streamed from his head, and he collapsed as the engine sputtered and began to die. With the captain unconscious, the women were suddenly alone in the chaos. None of them knew how to sail the vessel. The radio crackled uselessly, broken by the storm, and strong currents dragged them toward a remote ice-covered island. The Northern Dream leaned dangerously moments away from sinking. In the panic, they grabbed whatever they could reach and shoved the emergency life raft into the raging waves just as the ship slammed into rocks and split apart. They hauled the captain into the raft and battled freezing water and crashing waves until they stumbled onto the rocky shoreline. Behind them, the Northern Dream sank beneath the swirling sea, carrying most of their supplies with it. Captain Mackenzie briefly woke on the beach, only long enough to whisper that no rescue would come. He hadn't filed a plan for this isolated area, keeping his best fishing spots secret. Then he passed out again, leaving the four women to face the wilderness alone with whatever scraps they had saved. Surrounded by ruthless cold beneath a low, stormy sky, they stepped into a survival nightmare they had only read about in fiction. The island was a cage of harsh forests, low twisted pines, frozen ground that cracked loudly under their boots, and jagged rocks cutting through layers of snow. The chilling wind sliced even through their thickest clothes. Their instincts, sharpened by years of reading survival stories, surged into action. Kayla took control, organizing shelter and rationing their few supplies. EA searched for firewood and fresh water, her outdoor experience a lifeline. In the brutal landscape, Maya set up a small medical area, doing her best to clean the captain's wound and care for their injuries. Tessa, trying to keep their hope alive, explored the area for safer routes and turned beach scraps into makeshift tools. But all their preparation still wasn't enough for the island's cruelty. The temperature dropped far below freezing even in daylight, their breaths forming icy clouds. Wolf cries echoed through the forest with eerie timing, yellow eyes shining from the tree line, and huge bear tracks circled their campsite. One frightening afternoon, a massive grizzly appeared at the edge of camp, and they barely drove it away with flames and desperate shouting. As days stretched into a week, stress tightened around their group like a vice. The cold, hunger, and fear chipped away at their patience. Old arguments resurfaced. Kayla's controlling nature sparked tension. Tessa's hopeful attitude clashed with EA's blunt practicality. Maya's attempts to keep them calm sometimes felt strained and forced. Caring for the injured captain made everything even heavier, but just when their friendship felt like it might shatter, memories of their past together pulled them back. Maya's heartbreak during her divorce, EA's troubles with her daughter, all the times they had lifted one another through life's worst storms. These shared histories kept them from breaking. During one desperate search for supplies, Maya stumbled across unsettling signs of people who had been stranded before them. Empty food cans, a water-damaged journal filled with frantic notes, and carvings on trees warning of strange things on the island. Voices in the wind and shadows that moved on their own. The find chilled them more than the freezing air. Ghost stories they once laughed about suddenly felt dangerously real. Their nights turned frightening. Strange noises echoed in the darkness. Footsteps crunched through the snow though no one was walking. Distant voices whispered names, sometimes sounding eerily familiar. Dark shapes slipped between trees, disappearing whenever anyone tried to look straight at them. The women huddled together at night, their trust strained by hunger, fear, and the sense that something unseen was watching them. When Captain Mackenzie finally woke enough to speak, he confirmed their fears. They were on one of the most isolated islands in the region, far from all routes. Their only hope was to reach an abandoned weather station on the far side, which might still have emergency equipment. The journey was brutal. Supporting the weak captain, they crossed dangerous ravines where one wrong step meant disaster. They pushed through forests where predators stalked them and walked along exposed ridges where icy winds froze their skin within seconds. The trek felt endless, filled with near-deadly falls, close calls with wild animals, moments when they thought they were going in circles, and the constant fear that they might die without ever being found. But after what felt like an eternity, they finally saw the old weather station through the trees, its metal walls battered but still standing. To their shock, the emergency radio still worked. Their distress call brought the Coast Guard rushing through the icy waters and frozen winds. When the helicopter finally appeared, the 4 women and the badly injured captain collapsed into tears, their nightmare finally over. Back home, safe in warm houses, their weekly book club gatherings gained new meaning. The adventure books they loved now felt heavier, filled with truths they had lived through. Their bond had grown unbreakable, forged through fear, courage, and the brutal heart of the Alaskan wilderness. They knew their greatest stories weren't found in novels, but engraved forever in their shared fight for survival, their trust in each other, and their memories of a land both beautiful and merciless. Our 5th tale brings us to a couple who,